So the Great Western story is one, especially here in Houston. And I would ask you, for those of you that are in Houston or downtown, just go up to the 17th floor of the Texas Heritage Building, press that button, and walk out into that foyer. And that's what I visualized when I thought about it. We're going to talk a lot about visualization. Auntie? And these are the other major things, and I think a few of them are important to focus on, because it's important about how you can take your business to the next level. Now remember, I had a $2 billion idea, $2 billion. So we did our deal with Leggett. We found a New York Stock Exchange member firm. Because we had Leggett, a New York Stock Exchange member. Now all these, it's because we had this, we could do this, and that's how it works. We were able to get a New York Stock Exchange member firm because of our track record to sell our next deal. In December '83, the next deal was $5.4 million. On New Year's Eve, we bought a little UK subsidiary from John Allen's company over the phone. We didn't go to check the assets. I think we signed the papers weeks later. Then we now moved into an office with 2,000 square feet. We agreed to drill some wells. Mark then left the law firm and he got his 10%. Now we went over to visit UK assets that I bought from John Allen Chalk over the phone. They had tax reasons, and I can't remember all the reasons you had to sell it. But as it turned out, there was more money in the bank than we paid him for it. Yep. 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 There was more money in the bank, and it was a little deal, but I mean, they had to do it, and they didn't have time, and so we did it over the phone. Now, while we were there, we saw a window of opportunity that were taking little oil and gas companies public that couldn't have got the time of day here. And we said, I decided that I could find assets. First of all, our company was bigger than the ones that were taken public. I could find assets and we can go public here. There's a window of opportunity, so we decided to go public. And we got a letter of commitment from a company called Brown Shipley. And we came back to the United States. This was in March of 1984. We had the letter of intent. We also opened our Houston satellite office, and Leanne was hired on April Fool's Day 1984. Right? April Fool's, kind of apropos through what we've been through together over the last 9 years. Then we decided that the stuff that we were going to take public, I gave a $60,000 option for $2 million worth of property in March of 1984, and I took that $60,000 public. We also, at the same time, did another drilling fund. We went public on my birthday. I visualized going. My exit strategy was to bail out on my birthday before I was 40. Taking Great Western public was my exit strategy on my 39th birthday. So we turned $60,000 into $50 million. In 3 months, 3.5, March to August, or 5 months. Now they told me you can't take an option public. Just another time. We worked hard at it. We were there day and night. And a lot of people followed our lead. The people that bought the company, the public shares, we sold 25% of the shares for $10 million. We decided, because we wanted to be perceived track record, even though we didn't have it, we started paying a dividend from the very beginning because we wanted to be a trustee stock. We wanted to be a widows and orphan stock. And even though we were only 1 year old, people saw that we paid a dividend. People invested in us. Nobody went and checked to see that we had just been in business 5 months. All they looked is down the dividend sheet. Great Western pays a dividend. Must be a good company. They didn't have smart stockbrokers to tell them any different. But I would have sold you anyway if you had been in the business by then. But because we were thinking ahead, I moved to Scotland. As soon as we went public, I changed the investment direction because I saw a better opportunity, and it was the difference between external growth and internal growth, and we're going to talk a lot about that. And then we had our first large asset acquisition, which was a Fortune 200 company Whitaker Corporation. We bought their oil and gas assets. Next. We moved into a 3,500 square foot office. We made a series of small acquisitions. We changed brokerage firms. And then our first major acquisition for $55 million was a company here in Houston called L&B Oil. We moved the headquarters to Houston. Great Western was now a player in the hunt. And then our first super major acquisition was $155 million. Bow Valley USA. Bow Valley was a Canadian company. Now, every one of these things that I'm just walking through very casually, they said you can't do it. You're not an engineer. You're not a geologist. You can't run an oil and gas company. You can't do this. You can't do that. Every single one of them. I wonder if the place is on fire. Okay, now, Charlie dies January 26, 1987. I come back to the U.S. In 1987, I was away from my family 242 days. I didn't see my wife or kids. 242 days. Some of you in this room know my wife, know my kids. Big sacrifice. Big money brings big problems and big sacrifices. It goes with the territory. I come back. We do various bond offerings. We move into the 44,000 square foot office I told you about, which was part of my dream. I moved back to California after Charlie dies. We continue to grow the company. Conti. We do a series of other acquisitions and deals, bringing us through to September 1990, just after the Iraqis invaded Kuwait. We were the first money offering done, major money offering, only money offering after the war. They said it couldn't be done, as a number of the other things. We had become a trustee stock because now we had paid dividends for 5 years. But the perception was that we had been a trustee stock because we paid a dividend, because normally brand new companies. A lot of success in your business is perception. The perception of the people you do business with. Now, okay, Auntie. Okay. Now, this is what it's all about. This separates the men from the boys and the girls from the gals, or the women from the girls. This is the crux of what made the Great Western story possible. This is the crux of what the various other things that I've done in my life possible. This is something that I developed between 1976 and 1978. Just as I hope and wish and pray that today is a revelation for a lot of you. In 1976, I had the pleasure of attending a seminar put on by a very bright man named Jim Newman. Jim Newman's, some of his stable are Dennis Waitley, Dreyer, to name a couple. Jim Newman is now semi-retired. He had a seminar called PACE, Personal and Company Effectiveness. And he is the man that is credited with the comfort zone. He invented, if you will, in the late 50s, early 60s, the comfort zone. Now, I'm going to give you an example of comfort. If I had $1,000 bills and we had a 2x12 here on the ground, and I had $1,000 bills over there, I'm sure everybody in this room could walk back and forth on this 2x12 all day long and pick up these $1,000 bills. Is that probably true? Now we put the 2x12 50 stories up. Is there anybody that walked 50 stories up for $1,000 bills across the 2x12? Okay. Okay. I think I'd crawl. Yeah. Yeah, it's windy. It's windy up there. It's windy up there. Now, but a lot of you, the comfort changed. You're not as comfortable, right? Okay. Now, what if your child was over there and your child was on fire? Somebody had just doused gasoline, you know. More of you would be able to get across that 2x12. you know. And see, I walk 50 stories up now. It's hard for me to think of being on the ground floor. I can't think. Well, first of all, I don't want to think that way anymore. It's like when I was presented a year ago to the Queen Elizabeth, I was very comfortable. A couple years ago when I met President Bush, I was very comfortable. I am not daunted by business situations, by problems, by challenges. I feel very comfortable because I feel comfortable with it that I can accomplish and do almost anything. To me, yesterday's dreams are today's realities. I'm very, very much a believer, and these aren't new concepts. These are my words for my 5 credos, that what you think about the most is what you will be in the future. My mother used to tell me, you go to bed with dogs, you get up with fleas. Now that was her way of saying the same thing, I think. She was referring to some of the girls I dated in high school. But at the time, but she meant, I think she meant something else. But they become your realities. Seeing your dreams ahead. How many of us as a child practice asking somebody out for a prom? How many of us as a child practice asking our parents for something that you knew they were going to say no to? A lot of us. I mean, how many of us have practiced our tennis?
Lots.
Yeah. How many have practiced? See, we practice everything, you know. There's a reason why, you know, when Joe Montana gets in the last 2 minutes of a football game, and they go into the 2-minute drill or whatever it's called, and he has practiced that, 1, for real, and 2, in his mind, millions of times. When people in athletic events, they're going to run the sprints or they're going to do high jumping, they visualize, they see themselves going over it and accomplishing it time and time again. But see, we make life too difficult. Business is no different. Practicing, and I call practice within yourself, when you're without. I practice. I give the commencement speech, and it's in the back of the book here. 2 years ago, where I went to school, I had practiced. I was comfortable because I had been there 15 years. I'd been there 15 years. The first time I ever addressed a group of 6,000 or 7,000, I was comfortable because I had practiced. The first time that I gave a sales presentation in the UK to convince people to give me $50 million for $60,000 worth of goods, I had practiced. Athletic teams practice. Why do athletic teams practice? Jim, why do tennis pros practice?
Well, every once in a while you're going to get in that situation where you spend a lot of time practicing, but you're going to get in those tight situations every once in a while, and that's when all the hard work pays off. You know, there's not that many times when it's going to come down to the crucial element, but you got to get ready for it.
They practice because then they're comfortable with it. Why don't you, as individuals, practice, for those of you that don't, the crucial situations for your business? Now, I know trial lawyers that practice. I mean, they go to the extent of even having moot courts and stuff like that, shadow juries in the audience. I mean, why would you think being successful at business is any different? Everything I do well, I practiced. We have a karate master in the audience, Master Stewart, and I mean, I don't need to talk to him about practice. I mean, he understands probably better than anybody in the room. But we forget the things that worked for us as children, we don't do as adults. We just don't. It's just like why I talked about the alpha state, being in the zone, and why kids can learn easier things. They can learn foreign languages easier. They can do a lot of things easier because they don't have all these filters. They don't have all this conditioning. It's the same in business. I act as if I have no limits to my abilities. None. And when I was a kid, people called me cocky, pompous, arrogant. And then as I had some success, and then lucky was added on. Okay. Lucky. And then when I got into my early 30s, it was cocky, braggadocious, da-da-da-da, still lucky. When I got into my 40s, and now I'm going to be 48 in a few days, now I'm eccentric. I'm not lucky anymore. I'm eccentric. And they certainly don't say that he was at the right place at the right time, because they know that I rode oil from 40 to 10. So, I mean, they know that. But see, my attitudes have not changed. I've always, when I went back to give that speech at Cal State Northridge, there were still some professors that were there when I was there, and they asked Dr. Shirley Teeter, who's one of the senior, she's a dean, I believe, and he said, Dan has not changed 1% since the late 60s. Just in the late 60s, he hadn't done anything except flap his mouth, which was true. A lot of truth in that. But it's how you act. Burl mentioned, again last night, I keep pointing back to her, but you acted differently when you went in and talked to these people, and their attitude changed, didn't it? And it's something different. It's contrary to how you have done your business and how you've been conditioned. When I was a successful stockbroker, and I was one of the big hitters in the early 70s, I assumed a share order of 1,000 shares in those days was a big deal. And my nickname was 1,000 shares at the market, because if you put limits, then a lot of times you don't get the order off. And I just assumed, when I used to call on people, I didn't ask them whether they thought it was a good idea or not. I told them I had an opportunity. And I was only calling 25 people. And you're number 6 on my list. And I just assumed. When I sold real estate, I had a 94.6% closing ratio. When I sold real estate. The only way you left my office is if you died without buying. You either went out on a stretcher or you bought. Because I assumed it was a good deal for them, and I ultimately became a closer. Well, I don't know if they still have closers, I just assumed. I remember the first person I ever sold was William Lundigan, the actor. Yeah, and he went out standing up because he bought. Priests, nuns. I used to do a seminar for real estate, where I used to liken Lake Havasu to, and me presenting this investment opportunity to them, to Moses coming down with the tablets. And I had this part of the seminar, I'd get down like this, and I'd say, and there he was. And Linda, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, used to be in the back of the room going like this, I mean, trying to make me laugh, trying to get me unfocused. Because, for somebody that we used to take our Rolls Royce to the 49-cent car wash. She thought it was all funny money anyway. What the hell? So I was down there trying to be serious, and here I still remember, we had a Carmelite priest, we had a Jesuit priest and 2 Immaculate Heart nuns crying in the front row. And I'm down like this, and Linda's in bed like this. And that night I did lose my focus, because the thing turned into pandemonium, but I was focused, and I believed in that product at the time. Lake Havasu is there now. It wasn't when I was there. I was a visionary, boy. Those view lots on the ocean, or the lake view lots, I was a visionary, because, boy, it came 6, 8, 10 years later. But I acted as if I had no limits to my abilities, and we tend to be cautious. We tend to not trust our instincts. We tend to not believe in ourselves enough. We tend to come up with a myriad of reasons why it can't be done. One of which is conventional wisdom. One of which is your best friends. Your best friends, most times in business, are your worst enemies. Your best friends, because unless, and it's a sad thing to say about human nature, but very few of your real friends will revel in your success. Very few. And that's unfortunate. And I've got the same friends, I've had the same friends 15, 20, 25 years. And one of them who I wanted to be here was Thelma Box. God bless her. She looks like a miniature Dolly Parton. And not miniature in one aspect, but kind of a shorter Dolly Parton, I'll say. And she was a very successful real estate person in Midland, Odessa, got a divorce, moved to Graham, Texas, and became very successful and built a motel, and then the oil boom killed her. And now she gives motivational seminars to people that wear prosthesis. And she doesn't wear any. And I always but she's a great salesperson. But Thelma is a very focused lady. I mean, and probably somebody told her you can't sell that unless you really are missing a limb or something. And she's running around the country doing that. She was going to be here, but she's in Europe. And another person I wanted to be here who's from Houston, Candace Knoll, who's my prized pupil, I write about all the time, who went from, when I met her, she went from renting. She has a service for executives. She moves in family, she takes care of them, puts them in school, and does all these things for an executive who moves into town. She went from leasing properties to now she owns 55 properties here in Houston. And when I'm in town, I stay at one of them, one of her condominiums. She lives in River Oaks, drives a Rolls Royce. She's 42 years old, single, good looking. But now she's so focused. I mean, men are not part of her life. I mean, they're just a bother. They won't last long. And she's going to kill me for saying this. She meets them. I'll meet you for coffee. And she drives up, and she keeps the engine running, I think. And she sits down, has a cup of coffee, and if she likes the guy or doesn't like the guy, then she says, well, it's real nice meeting you, and just signs the check and says, gets up and leaves and drives off. I said, Candace, so that, I mean, you're tough. She says, well, you taught me how to be focused. If I don't like it from the beginning, it ain't going to get better. She says, Dan, it's just not going to get better. It can only get worse. But she's I think she's out of town, and she couldn't be here, but she's my prized pupil, and for those of you that are here, it'd be a real pleasure to hear her talk, because she's been doing these longer than anybody. I've been giving these lectures and workshops for a lot of years on both sides of the Atlantic. Only recently do I get paid for it. But she knows, as do some of these others in the room, and that enthusiasm, most of the people you do business with, and most of you in this room, are not enthusiastic about what you do in business. And I haven't even been there, but I can tell. And the reason I can tell is because most people aren't enthusiastic. Now, enthusiasm is a word that comes from the Greek word God within. I'm going to give you a couple examples. How many in the room have played college football, high school football? Some of the guys, okay. Now, when you were playing sandlot football, and we're playing touch or tackle, and it's us three against those three, and you come back and you tell me, I can beat this guy in the flat. This guy's a tub of shit or whatever. I can beat him in the flat. And the other guy, but you're confident, but you're not enthusiastic. You come back jumping up and down. Hey, Dan, I can beat this. Ooh, throw me the ball. Now, even though you may be a better athlete, I got one. I'm probably going to pick him up, go down and cut in, because he came across with enthusiasm. Not, well, I think I got a 60% chance, 50-50, I could beat him in the flat, maybe, but it's raining and I could drop the ball. And, your arm hasn't been as good as it usually is, Pena. And we've all got hangovers from last night cavorting around. I mean, who are you going to throw the ball to? Now, you go into a banker. Now, John Allen could teach this part of the class. You go into a banker enthusiastic about your product, about your subdivision, about whatever. And enthusiasm is infectious. Instead of coming into the bank with your tail between your legs, no, God, banks are loaning money right now, and I need it so bad, and my husband's out of row, shit, what am I going to do? And who's going to give you anything? But most people come into bankers just like I described, I'm ashamed to say. Most people come into your employer, your superior, with a project that you want like this. Oh, I know he's going to say, no, I've spent 9 months working up these numbers. Now, I can tell you right now, which you already know, I never have gone into anybody that way. I am surprised, stunned, shocked, chagrined when somebody tells me no. I can't believe it. But I also know, and you've got to know, it's my fault if I can't convince Auntie, my boss, of ABC. It's not Auntie's fault. It's my fault. I didn't do it right. I go back to the drawing table and I regen it and I do it again. And I keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it 17 times, like we said earlier. With enthusiasm. When I used to watch Master Stewart give my son's karate lessons, I mean, he was looking for enthusiasm. He was looking for some of the forms that they do. He was looking for them doing it with conviction, with enthusiasm. And I've seen him chastise black belt, which his son is a black belt, down for not doing it enthusiastically. Isn't that right? And it not only holds true for sports, it holds true for business. The reason why people want to do business with me, there's two. One, I've got a track record of success. A lot of that track record I borrowed from other people like John Allen Chalk and other people, but it's my track record now. And number two, because they know I'm enthusiastic. And the deals normally get done by enthusiastic people. Not normally, always get done. Unfortunately, most people confuse wishing and wanting with pursuing. Wishing and wanting with pursuing. Their desire for a dream may be desperate and deep, but when the desire fails to produce, they conclude the dream cannot be theirs. Actually, the only proof they have is that the longing is not enough. The data at hand merely prove that desire alone cannot deliver. And what we're going to talk about is a framework, a methodology. Now, it's been said before that the greatest success in life, man becomes what he thinks about most of the time. And Henry Ford, one of my idols, the original Henry Ford, said, if you think you can or you think you cannot, you will. You will. Other people have said it much better than I. James Allen. But the end is what I think is important. You will become as small as your controlling desire, as great as your dominant aspiration. Now, what we are going to produce out of you in the audience, because people follow the fellow that follows a dream. You will find people more willing to do deals with you, transactions, more willing to go out with you, more willing to marry you, more willing to whatever you, if they feel that you are a person that pursues your dream. People come and listen to me talk because they know that I pursued my dream and that I've been successful at fulfilling my dream. And as Napoleon Hill says, a fearless man thrives on far horizons. Now, it has also been said that if you will do the thing you fear, boy, this is important, if you would do the thing you fear, death of fear is certain. Courage is not the absence of fear and anxiety, it is proceeding in spite of those feelings. And if you haven't already got it, most people don't succeed because they're afraid of success. They're afraid of failure. They're afraid of the things that are attributable to not succeeding. And what we're going to do is we're going to... Auntie? Now, speaking of far horizons, made me think of a little story. Again, Napoleon Hill. Does anybody remember reading or hearing how Napoleon Hill got his first Rolls Royce, or visualized his first Rolls Royce, or how he set his goal for his first Rolls Royce? He was 7 years old. He was dirt poor, I guess, in Tennessee. Tennessee, where he's from, and he was sitting in a creek when he used to feel lonely. He used to go down to this creek. Is that how they say it? Creek? Creek. And he used to sit on this old log, and he used to sit down there and cry because, you know, his mother had passed away, and his dad wasn't doing well, and it was poor times. And he sat on this log in this creek, and he says, someday I'm going to be rich, and someday I'm going to have these things. And he says, and he used to close his eyes and visualize a Rolls Royce. And in that time, there were the old boxy big things that looked like a truck. But he says he visualized it. Then, when he got into his, I guess, 40s, and he had worked on the project for Mr. Carnegie for 20 years, and he had written, in fact, no, he had not published Think and Grow Rich yet. Pardon? Oh, he had not published, I believe, Think and Grow Rich. And he got his first Rolls Royce, and it happened overnight. Some guy gave him a Rolls Royce, his first Rolls Royce, and he took that car and he drove it back to Tennessee, drove it down into that creek. And he parked it right where he saw it when he was 7. 35 years later. Now, he visualized that goal. And an important concept that I have to get across is that when these goals come to fruition, it's extremely important to put them in that same context that you first visualized it. He went back and he drove it there because that is validation of what he had desired. That is why when professional athletes, golfers, even when they hit a good shot, first of all, they visualize the shot they're going to hit before, then they hit it, then they visualize it again, and they relive those positive experiences. When you do things right, revel in it. No matter what your husband, wife, friends, parents, revel in it. Pat yourself on the back. Blow smoke up your you-know-what. Revel in it. Because one of the things I'm going to talk about later is glory is fleeting. And it's much easier to replicate successful occurrences if they're vivid in your mind. Revel in your success. Be they small or be they great. I mean, take the time to, when you do something right and you have a success, I mean, think about it. Some people say that, you know, talk about it. And if you got nobody to talk to and nobody to listen to, talk about it in front of a mirror. Get used to it, is what I'm trying to say. Get used to being successful. Get used to being right. Get used to getting people to do what you want them to do. Get used to it. And the more you're used to it, the easier it becomes. I can't envision people telling me no. It's hard for me to conceptualize that no is no. No is yes to me. No was yes to me when I sold real estate. No was yes to me when I sold stocks and bonds. No was yes to me when I was got to the investment banking side and just sold deals. No was yes to me. No, I can't understand that. In 1983, I was invited by the Israeli government to go back and bid on a deal by the Israeli National Oil Company to drill for oil in Israel. And there is very little oil. They've only found a little gas. I can tell you some great stories about why the Israelis say, how could the oil, I mean, what the hell happened? I mean, I could tell you all kinds of stories. But I went back and I said, I need an official invitation from the government. So Charlie, Mark, and I got on a plane. The three of us flew round trip, TWA, from Los Angeles to Tel Aviv for $3,300. I still remember. We hired a high-priced consultant, like somebody like Chalk. He had to fly first class to New York and rest, Concorde from New York to Paris and rest, then first class from Paris to Tel Aviv and rest. I still remember. His ticket was $10,000. So we're there, and Minister Modieh was the energy minister at the time. He was a lawyer. That's the only thing that was wrong with him. He was a lawyer. And Ellerman Hammer had been there the day before, bidding for the deal. Superior Oil was there, a bunch of big companies. So we met, And I had already visualized on the plane that they were going to keep us to the last minute. They kept us waiting in a hotel where I met Mark Spitz, by the way. The only thing good happened, and he's quite an interesting fellow. But talk about visualization, when he won those 7 or 8 gold medals, I mean, we used to talk about this, and as we were slurping down drinks in the bar, which not many people see that side of him. But so I visualized being in there. I visualized they were going to say Arm & Hammer, and I visualized all this, and I was trying to think what I was going to do. So now we're there. And, of course, I'm dressed like this, and they're dressed in short-sleeve shirts and cotton pants because it's hot. And here Charlie, Mark, and I go in our Brooks Brothers suits, and we're just dying from the heat. And I go through this presentation, and Minister Moday says, Mr. Pena, just explain to me some rationale why we should pick Little Great Western Energy, was the name of the company, as opposed to Arm & Hammer, Superior Oil. He says, you're not even Jewish. I mean, I don't understand. And I stood up, and I said, Mr. Minister, with the greatest respect, do you know the difference between chicken shit and chicken salad? Now, Mark and Charlie slide. Now, Mark's Jewish, and Mark is just dying. And the bodyguards and everybody, they're all looking at me. And the minister looks at me, and it seemed like an eternity. But it was maybe 5 seconds. He says, yes, I know the difference, Mr. Pena. And I said, well, you've been dealing with the chicken shit, and now you're dealing with the chicken salad. And again, it seemed like eternity, but it was 5 or 6 seconds. And then he starts to laugh, and he turns to Dr. Elazar Barak, who is the managing director of the Israeli National Oil Company, who is also a 2-star general, PhD, MIT. He says, Mr. Pena's got the business. That was in. Presentation, I mean, no more Arm & Hammer, no more anything, okay? And Rebecca in the back has got a similar story about how she got a big advertising deal that she maybe will share with us later after lunch. But I acted as if I had no limits. That was a ballsy thing to do, but I could see that we weren't going to get any place. So I acted as if I had no limits to my abilities, but I had already thought it through before I got there. And then I had also visualized, from a negotiating standpoint, what they were going to do is they were going to stonewall us till the Sabbath, because in the Sabbath they can't work anymore. They go, Friday at sundown till Saturday at sundown. And I knew that they were going to do that to us. So I also knew one of my goals, and I told Mark and Charlie, we're going to get them to sign it in on the Sabbath at 10, 11 o'clock at night, Friday night. No way, Dan. These guys are, Orthodox is the right word, right? They're Orthodox. There's no way. So during the negotiating process, their head lawyer was a guy, Harvard educated. His name sounded like Elazar, who's the head of the PLO? Arafat. It sounded kind of like Arafat. And so I knew that it would be insulting if I called him Arafat. I called him Arafat 5 days in a row. And finally, at the end of the 5th day, he said, Mr. Pena, my name is Arafat, or whatever it was. And I said, Arafat, I mean, what the hell's the difference? And he says to me, Mr. Pena, I can't begin to explain to you how insulting that is. And so, but we got them in the mood that they did work through the Sabbath. We signed it at 11 o'clock at night. We drank, I have pictures, we toasted, and I have a picture of the clock, and I have a picture of a calendar to show what day it is. Then they even took us, they sinned even more. They took us to a Bedouin restaurant that night where they had rats as big as cats running around. And John Allen will appreciate this. Mark didn't like sitting on the pillows on the floor because you could hear the rats outside the tent. And in those days I drank Johnny Walker Black Label, and these guys aren't supposed to drink. And they had 3 or 4 bottles of Johnny Walker Black Label on the table, and Charlie looked at me, Solidain, and I looked at him. I said, I guess we're going to have to drink all those, Charlie. Of course, they drank with us, but we did the deal. But what I'm trying to illustrate is that we acted as if there weren't any limits to our abilities. I have another story. The Los Angeles Police Protective League, when I was in the brokerage business, they had a small account. It was only $260 million. That's probably not much money in today to have a managed account for $260 million. So Merrill Lynch and everybody and his brother were bidding for this business. So I went, and there used to be a restaurant called the Dynasty Club in Los Angeles, an after-hours club. The policemen and FBI and gangsters too used to frequent. When you checked in, you had to check your gun. Everybody's checking their guns on the tables, and I'm the only guy in the place that didn't have a gun. So I started hanging out with the guys on the Police Protective League. They were on the board of directors, and I became friends with them. And we drank, and we got the business. I mean, it didn't take a genius. I mean, now when I went to the next presentation, these guys I had helped into cabs, told lies to their wives. I turned the situation around because there was no way that we should have succeeded. And the Great Western story and the successes that you will have from here on are going to be places and doing things that are out of the ordinary, out of your old comfort zone. 10 stories up, 20 stories up, 100 stories up. And the more you think about it, the more it will feel comfortable, the more it will become natural. That's the word I've been searching for all morning. Natural. And the more natural it becomes, the easier you'll do it. And just as when I used to play tennis, if I could call it that, with Jim in the back, the more I played, the better I played.
Correct.
It was that. Yeah, correct. And he used to ask me before we'd start, have you been out on the court since we last played? And I never lied. Most of the time I said no. But a couple of times that he didn't ask and I played much better, it's because I had played 4 times that week. And he obviously knew. He says, yeah, you've been out here. You've been hitting the ball with somebody, Dan. Because tennis, I had to work at, to say the least. I was asking him earlier, I like to take my tennis lessons at 2 to 4 in the afternoon on when it's hot. Because one, he was always available because nobody else wanted to take tennis lessons. And it was a better workout. And
got to practice under the worst conditions.
That's right. You got to practice under the worst. And that's a very good point. Even though I tell you to practice successful occurrences, you also have to practice and simulate in your mind when things are what could go wrong. In your mind and in your dreams, you overcome them. But you cannot visualize perfect scenarios. For those of you that are married, you know that there's good times and bad times in married life. And I don't ask these kind of questions anymore. I've learned over the years because we have married couples sometimes. And Dean, I was going to ask you, but I'm not going to. Okay. But you have to simulate successful transactions, successful happenings, but you have to also simulate problems and challenges and how you've overcome them and what you do. Now, let's see what time it is. We're going to take another short break, get some coffee, water, and I will ring the bell in a few minutes. Yep. No. I want to go back and address a point that I thought of during the break, and it's quite important. This no, not being no, but being yes. For those of us that have children, we've all told our children no, and you told him when he's a young man, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. Now, my mother never told me no growing up. My mother is kind of goofy. She still is a little goofy, but and I don't think that's why. But I mean, when people ask me, well, how did you develop no meaning yes to you? Well, one of the reasons, when I was growing up, my mother never told me no. She would always phrase it a different way. She had read a book in the 40s or 50s, or I don't know when it was. She read some book. Because my dad was forever telling me no. There was not one thing that I could ever do that he said yes to. So my mother, in desperation, not wanting me to be warped or something, she said, Doctor, we'll talk about it later over a drink. You can give me some therapy. Anyway, so she never told me no, and she would phrase things in a different way. She also, when I was growing up, I didn't crawl around on the floor. My mother carried me on her hip till I was 2.5. I walked. I never crawled as a child. And you can have a field day with my mother. Could have a field day with my mother if she was here. And because people ask me, well, are there anything different than when you were growing up? I had a lot of problems. I was in trouble. That one time I got expelled from school, I dropped an aquarium from the second floor of that building, trying to drop it on my teacher. And I missed them. I got thrown out of school. Another time I got thrown out of school because I got in a fight, and a guy with glasses, in those days he had real glass, said, you won't hit me, and I did. I busted him and shattered the lenses in his eyes. And then another time I got in a fight and I broke a kid's arm in 7 places. When he was down on the ground, he had fallen, he broke it, and he said, my arm is broken. I said, no, it's not, but now it is. So I was a troublesome kid. But, so those two things, never getting said no to by my mother and carrying me around like I was a growth on her hip, I don't think those had anything to do with why I don't hear no. But it's important that, see, the way we've been conditioned and taught, no has a stigma. It has a big stigma. No, Marcia, you can't have that region. You've got to stay in this region. No, you can't do institutional business. No, you can't do this. No, no, you can't do this, Dan, because Payne Weber doesn't allow that. Excuse me. No, Dan, you can't go in the coal business because you lucked out in the oil business, and God knows you don't know anything about coal. There's a stigma, and it's very important to make a concerted effort to, when somebody tells you no, even someone you respect, to sit back and think about it. Because I do. When people tell me no, other than a brain surgeon that wants to operate on my brain, see, no decision that anybody in this room is going to make is life-threatening. We have no brain surgeons. See, and you have to realize, that. And it's an important concept. And somebody asked me something at the break. That is one of the biggest things that when you overcome your fear of the no word, your whole thought process changes. It just changes. And I don't hear no. I just don't. It's like water off a duck's back. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, my oldest son, Dan Jr., doesn't hear no. He is like, I spit and it grew up like me. And because communication is much greater, he's smarter than I was at the same age, and that's a problem. That's going to challenge, because he's figured out things that I was 16, 17 before I figured out. And he's only just going to be 12. And, to use the 90s word, that's going to be a real challenge for me and my wife as he gets older. But he has figured out no is yes as well. Whereas Derek knows no. Kelly, my daughter, knows no means yes. So, but it's an extremely important concept, and I can't emphasize it enough. Now, we want to talk about being focused now, because hypergrowth, quantum leap type of growth, the kind of growth where we were 5 squared times 5 squared, that kind of growth you cannot have without this laser, what I call laser beam focus, and you cannot have without total commitment. And we're going to talk about that burning desire. And we're going to talk about, not in terms of past failures, we're going to talk in terms of next time how we overcome that negative incident. Because there are no failures, they're just mistakes, errors on the way to your ultimate success. Now, it's important. Now, I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and I'm a pretty persevering guy. But one of my keys to my success is I don't waste time on things I can't change. Now, there's a big differentiation. I can't change my mother, so I don't spend time trying to re-educate her. I also can't change how the IRA thinks about the British. I mean, now those are big, drastic examples, but there's certain things in your business career that you're going to come in life, you will come in contact with that you have no possibility whatsoever of changing. And one of the things that I pride myself on is I don't spend a lot of time, if any time, thinking about things I can't change. And it's one of the reasons and that I'm not as concerned about some of the world events as other people. And that doesn't make me a bad person, that I'm not. I worry about Bosnia and the death, and that's an awful thing, but there's not much Dan Penny can do about it. I worry about the fact that the Catholic Church is disintegrating. It's been disintegrating in my lifetime and losing people, and it's tough to get priests and nuns, even though one of my best friends is a Carmelite priest right here in town, Father John Fogarty. But there's not much Dan Penny can do to convince the Pope that he ought to let the priests get married or ban or change the celibacy. Not much. So I don't spend any time virtually thinking about things like that. I have only recently started thinking about the women's movement because I'm going to do a project. My partner's here tonight, or this afternoon, Becky Richardson, she's sitting in the back, where we're going to do seminars just for women. And so only recently, and I mean in recent time, like the last 120 days, have I given that much thought. I now read Working Woman, and I read, but I mean, prior to that, I didn't spend much time. And prior to me teaching this last year, I didn't spend much time. I didn't give a damn what students thought. I just didn't. Now, a lot of people in this room have concerns about things that are important to them, and that's great. But you got to remember, and I think it's important to differentiate, there's one thing to have an intellectual interest. That's great, I have an intellectual interest whether the monarchy is going to survive in Great Britain. But that's where it ends. Intellectually, after I read a few paragraphs of a story, I don't spend a lot of time. And a lot of people in this room and in every room that I've given this part of the talk to spend inordinate amount of time on things that they will never change in their lifetime. Never, ever, ever. And to give you a couple of live examples, if I had not been successful with the little story that I give at Minister Modeh in Israel, that was it. I shot my last volley. That was it. Whereas a lot of people would have come back. In fact, I know Mark wanted to come back, reorganize, rethink it through, get some supporters within our camp that were Jewish to do this, to do that, and come back and do it again. Not me. That was it. I knew. Now, I was successful. There's other times that I haven't been successful. Another example, when I convinced the North Yemen, there's one Yemen, but when I was there was one North Yemen, the North Yemen government to allow us to drill. I used a similar tactic. It's a much longer story, which I won't go into right now. But if I had not been successful, I wouldn't have gone back to regroup. There's certain times, and we're going to talk about it a little later, that there's a time to fold your cards, there's a time to play your cards, and there's a time to bluff them. The guys, Walton, Gates, Ross Perot, and those guys know how to play their cards. They know when to fold them, too. There are certain deals that you just walk away from because you can't change them. And it's intuitive. It's nothing that I can teach you, but there's certain things. Now, if one of the things, I had not given any thought to the women's movement because I didn't have a reason to. Now I have a reason. And I think the way we're structuring it is going to be very well accepted. But it's important not to waste time on things you can't change. I mean, you've all had friends and relatives that you know that talking to them about A, B, or C is like spitting in the wind. And business is the same. And so it's important to differentiate that from being persevering. Now, as I said earlier, you've got to concentrate and focus on your successes. And it's not that I haven't had any failures, because I've come back from near death in business 5 times. Now, I'm also the only motivational speaker, financial motivational speaker that I know of. I'm about $40 million poorer today than I was 3 years ago. Plus or minus 5. But I still have more net worth than any of the other speakers. Now, I don't focus on the fact that I'm $40 million poor. What I focus on is the fact that I'm still got a higher net worth than any of the other speakers. It would be very easy for me, but when I said that, I can always tell by the look on the faces of the audience, it would be very easy to wallow and feel sorry for myself. But as you've witnessed already in a few hours, there's a lot of things that I do, but one of them isn't wallow in self-pity. And so, for those of you that have had reversals, just put it in perspective. I sat in a room in New York City last November with a gentleman that had just written off $247 million. He was $247 million poor. Yeah, but he still had quite a bit of money. And he didn't focus on the 247. The only reason it came up is one of the other guys at the meeting was bitching because he was lost $5 million. So I popped up, and then he popped up, and so it kind of put the guy that had lost $5 million in his place. And he shut up the rest of the meeting, and we made a lot of progress. So focus on your successes. And I don't allow my children to hang around, going back to John Allen's example, with people that talk negative. I just don't allow it. Because you are with who you hang around, especially as a child. And I don't think we're going to have 2 miracles in my family in that I turned out all right and I'm a success based on how I started. There's one miracle of family. And I done had mine. So I don't want to take that chance with my children. And so I'm very strict, and I don't allow my children to hang around. I don't allow them to talk because a lot of people don't have respect for servants and things like that. If my children have a new friend that doesn't treat the people that work for us with respect, they're gone. They're history. I don't care who they are. So it's important. To achieve hypergrowth, you must divert avoidable mistakes and let your successes run. This is an important thing. Because what happens when everybody has some success, what do? We diversify. God damn, I'm going to go do this. I've been in the movie business. I mean, I lost more money. I made a movie with Richard Harris, Martin Landau, and Karen Black. Richard Harris and Martin Landau and Karen Black were names when I did movies with them. Couldn't lose. The movie was called The Last Chance, and it was more than that. I didn't realize it at the time. We lost, I think, $7 million in that movie. I did a country western special with Hoyt Axton and Dolly Parton. You cannot lose money, Pena. Lost our butt. I did the first Penthouse Pet of the Year awards with Bob Guccione. Well, that was a lot of fun, but we lost a lot of money. We lost a lot of money. Yeah, but that was a lot of fun. That one, anyway. Yeah.
You went bust?
Yeah, bust. Yeah, that's right. We went bust. Very good. That's very good. In fact, I tell the story, and we rented the Aladdin Hotel, the entire hotel, which isn't a smart thing to do, but we rented the entire Aladdin because we were big in those days. I had a 42,000 barrel a day refinery that during the small refiners by us, we were making $14 a barrel. So you can multiply 14 times 42,000. And I was into my jet plane phase at that time. And so we rented the entire Aladdin Hotel. And we were going to bring in all the oil traders from the United States because I was doing this Penthouse Pet of the Year Awards. We were filming it, and I thought the oil traders would have a big party. And Linda and I flew in on the jet. Tony Curtis was the MC, and Bob Goulet. There were two MCs. Tony Curtis is hitting on Linda, and I mean it was crazy money but then there was a tornado or something that kept a lot of the planes from flying in. So here I am with the Aladdin Hotel, I think we were paying $250,000 a day, if I remember correctly. And then we were on Golden Time because all the actors and actresses were going over. I didn't know what Golden Time meant, but that's basically it's a euphemism for getting screwed. I mean, and I don't mean in the physical sense. I mean, this money's flowing out of our pocket. So we did so that was my last venture in the movie business. We undiversified, and it's important to let your successes run, because what happens is when it becomes mundane, when it becomes easy, that's when we all decide we're going to do something else. My experience is to do more of the same. Do more of that more boring, more of that mundane crap. Just keep doing more of it. Now look we've got Exxon that went into the computer business that's now out of the computer business. We've got General Motors and various other companies that were in and out of the oil business. I mean, everybody can't stand being successful in their own business. They diversify. Now everybody, Sears and Roebuck is getting out of selling off their gas. Well, they got caught cheating, but they're selling off their gas stations, that business. They're getting, I think, out of the financial services business. I mean, everybody's getting out of the businesses that they got into when they were making all that money. They're having to downsize, fire all these people, lay all these people off. We've got engineers with 25 years experience that now have to go learn to be a school teacher or whatever. It's because we don't allow our successes to run. So the key to real super success is just avoiding or averting avoidable mistakes. I've heard golf pros say it's not how many good shots we hit, it's avoiding hitting bad shots. Tennis players, professionals, you'll hit good shots in your business. In my judgment, my experience, all you have to do is avoid hitting bad ones. It's a simple concept that very, very few people, myself included, now I know, but I mean, I had to go through those heartaches. And hopefully, you'll experience less heartaches by listening to what I've just said. Okay. Now, I've talked about being committed, and I like this piece by W.H. Murray. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance, which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic. Now, there are things that you have that you want to get started in business, or you want to change, or whatever. And I'm going to ask you to talk about those later. But as you know, as the advertisements for a lot of these seminars say, they talk about taking action. And normally to them, it's taking action is writing them a check. And sometimes that is the start, though. And what people forget, and it's unfortunate now because there's a lot of gimmickry in this industry that I've just joined, that sometimes it is that first step to write a check, to do something to make your lot in life better. But there are things that you want to do, have thought about doing. I had dinner at the castle a few nights ago with a career British Royal Marine colonel and his wife that have been friends of ours for a lot of years. And she has thought about, since 1985, about starting a business. This is the last time I talked to her about it, 1985. It's now 1993. And and she asked me 6 or 7 times, well, do you think I ought to do it? And about 6th or 7th time, I said, I'm going to tell you what I told you in 1985. I thought it was a good idea in 85. I thought it was a good idea, I think, in 88 or 89, the last time my wife mentioned that you mentioned it. And it's still a goddamn good idea in 1993. And so she said, well, then that means you think I ought to do it. And I collapsed from the table, and Dan Jr. is sitting there. And he looks out the window across to the Lunan River that runs by the castle, and he just spins back around and looks like Errol Flynn. He says, actually, I think that's what my father said. I think you ought to do it. And everybody starts laughing. But now I don't know. I hope she's going to do it. In fact, I'm sending her the seminar manual, and I'm sending her some other stuff. And her idea is really a good idea. But the point I'm trying to make is she's obviously hadn't been committed from 1985 because she hasn't done it. Most often, I've had conversations with women and men about, they're not happily married, but they can't make the commitment to get out or do something different. See, that's an easier and more graphic illustration that men and women understand than in business. But the same holds true for business. The same reason that people stay in bad relationships, this is one man's opinion, but is the very reason that people don't start or stay in bad business situations or don't start new business situations that would be more promising. Because it's easier and they don't have to make a commitment. And nothing, in my judgment, that's good can happen unless you start and you make that commitment. Okay. We are now okay. Now this is going to be something that, again, we have no brain surgeons. Closest we have is you, Judy, a psychiatrist. That's kind of a half-assed brain surgeon, isn't it? If you play with their brain but you don't cut it, right? Okay. The consequence of a misguided decision is de minimis in the concept of eternity. For those of you that are Texan, I'm going to put it a little differently. In the cosmos of time, any decision that you'll ever make will not be a fart in the wind. In the cosmos of time, I don't care what business you're in. I don't care what you do. 100 years from now, nobody gave a damn. Okay, if that's true, and if the closest we have is a half-assed brain surgeon here, okay, how and why do we labor so much on decisions in business? Why have I made 50,000 decisions, which is probably 48,000 more than the whole room put together? I want a volunteer, or I'm going to yank somebody up out of their seat. Why do you think that is? Why do we suffer, lament, bemoan, begrudge, sweat over making decisions when none of us does in this room, myself included? I mean, when you put it in the big picture of life, it doesn't mean a goddamn thing. I mean, I don't care where you've been, what you've done, what businesses you've started. No decision you're ever going to make. And that's why it's so much easier for me to make decisions than just about everybody in this room. Microphone. Rebecca.
If you want the answer, one of the answers, it goes back to what you were saying before. It's all about conditioning. from the time we're 2 years old, we are either right or wrong. And there's either one right answer or 40 gazillion wrong answers, but whatever you do, you don't want to be the one who raises your hand with the wrong answer, because everyone in authority, from your parents to your teachers to the principals to the officers to the whoever it is going to give you that look which says you are just really a worthless human being because you got the wrong answer. And so we're more worried about the wrong answer. We aren't even taught that there are 40,000 answers, possible solutions, breaking out of the box solutions to any given situation or problem that's presented to us. It's an educational process that people have worked at diligently our whole lives to teach us that more than anything else, okay, if you'll just not say anything, you're better off than saying the wrong thing.
That's absolutely right. We become more interested in being wrong than we do in being right. And unless unless you're in a life and death situation, which nobody in this room is, it doesn't matter. And the funny thing about it is, even when you're in a life and death situation, I was trained as an infantry second lieutenant during the Vietnam War, Fort Benning, Georgia, OCS. And you'd think in life-death situations this would be the opposite. But guess what? It's even more. You're trained as an infantry officer. Make a decision, Pena, even if it's wrong, because hesitation costs lives.
But if you make the wrong one, God will strike you down.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you what the Lord knows here today. So it's so crucial. I mean, I could talk about this a whole hour. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about recognizing and seizing opportunities. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about seizing and recognizing opportunities. And very few people in business look at it that way. But I can tell you for sure, Gates, Jobs, all those guys that I've already mentioned, don't worry about being wrong. It doesn't even enter their mind. What enters their mind is, how right am I going to be? Kirk Kerkorian right now, a billionaire, I think he's Armenian, is building the largest hotel in Las Vegas right now. And I think Bear Stearns is part of the deal. I was at Bear Stearns' corporate finance meeting recently, and I have a vague recollection. I know Kirk Kerkorian's doing it. Everybody in the room told him he was wrong. People he's paying a lot of dough to all said he's mad. He's finally flipped out. He's 76 or 78 years old, and he's finally lost it. And he made reference to 2 or 3 other times that he did the biggest whatever before, and they all said he was mad, and the hotel it was overbuilt or whatever. And 2 or 3 other times, I think I made $1.6 billion the one time, and I made $600 million the second time. But I only made $350 million the third time. And it doesn't even enter his mind about being wrong. But he also realizes that even if he is wrong, he realizes that in the cosmos of time, it doesn't mean anything. It really, even to a guy like that. Yet, I know people in this room that spend more time deciding on where the hell to eat goddamn dinner, or what kind of birthday card they're going to buy their mother or brother. You're going to buy our 900 birthday cards anyway. Than some of the major things in their business or in their life. I mean, it's a terribly crucial point. I mean, it is absolutely ludicrous. When I was on Wall Street, I used to tell people that, and at that time, I guess it's still true, you know, just as I said, you spend more time deciding um, what you're going to buy your father-in-law than you do on an investment decision that could impact your retirement. It's crazy. I mean, it just is. I mean, you spend more time on what car you're going to buy. I mean, I can name a whole list of things you spend more time on than probably the second most important decision you've ever made in your life, for those of you that are in business, is starting your business. Now, one of the things that you probably have given a little thought to, and I talked about it briefly, is your exit strategy is going to be dropping dead. I mean, yet you don't give that as much thought as perhaps where you're going to send your child to college, which is an important decision. I'm not trying to demean that. But you've got to put these things in perspective. And what I find, very, very successful people have put them in perspective. They know what the priorities are. And that was Freudian. See, when they know where the priorities are. And they line them up real quick. And the people that are aspiring to do that don't either attempt to line up the priorities at all, or they've got them all ass backwards. Mike, please, for the gentleman. Yes, sir.
We all have to make decisions from time to time, and there's those littlest decisions, and there's those big decisions, and then there's those tough decisions. The tough ones come when you're affecting people's lives, not yours, but theirs. And if you're wrong, it can affect their welfare. It can affect their livelihood, their well-being. That's tough. You don't want to be wrong.
No,
you damn sure want to think about it.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that at all.
But number one is the business.
Pardon?
Number one is the business.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of the business will take care of you. You can't get sentimental and throw the business to hell.
No, that's true. But what I'm saying is if you take care of the business is going to take care of your employees too. But you've been in business a long time? Okay. Now, would you agree that people spend an inordinate amount of time on things that really they don't need to? And that's the point I'm making. And that the people that are at that end of the continuum that we all want to, hopefully, all want to move closer towards, spend less time. And I'm not preaching to be ruthless, and because there's enough of that in business, and you can make a lot of money without being ruthless. I mean, because I know people. I don't know how to make a lot of money, balanced kind of life, but I know, because I wasn't ruthless doing mine, but I just never figured out the balance part until just the last few years. But what I'm saying is that much of the time we spend in our jobs and in our relationships are not in proportion to the significance of how they affect your life or your business. It's almost like we spend. This is just an analogy. Like we spend 3 minutes on every decision we're going to make the rest of our life. The life and death affecting our employees, buying a new tie, where we're going to go to dinner. I mean, our retirement, where we're going to go on our vacation, etc., etc., etc. And that's what we see more of. I can remember my father spending, had to be the better part of 3 weeks, trying to decide whether he was going to stay, I think, whether he was going to stay in the North Shore of Maui or the South Shore of Maui. Now, he was going to stay at Kapalua. I can't remember the names. The Kapalua Hotel or the Kanapali Hotel. You know, and he dreaded, Jesus, what if I don't like the rooms? Or what if I don't like that golf course? And I told him, if you don't like that, you just move to the hotel. I mean, you stayed there one night, you walk in the room, you just go up the street or go up the road. It's actually about 25 miles. But he went back and back, forth. And, I mean, and I've seen people do this in business. I mean, we've in Great Western, I mean, we lamented or I had people that worked for me that would lament on a decision that really didn't mean anything. I mean, and I know whether you have a corner office means things to people, and whether you got 3 windows or 2 windows. And it doesn't mean spit to me, but, and I once moved a guy who ultimately I wound up firing. He had an inner office with no windows. And I've got a friend of mine who tells me, Dan, that's the whole reason that relationship didn't work out. Because I wanted him close so I could call him, because I don't use the intercom system. I didn't used to just scream down the halls. And I wanted him right there. And it was an inner office with no windows. It was a big office, but it had no windows. Now remember, your windows were onto the courtyard? Yeah. On the golf course, okay. Yeah. But I mean, see, to me that doesn't mean anything. But the thing that means the most to me is profitability, execution. But we spend too much time, Auntie. We spend too much time not seizing and looking for the opportunities. Because we were talking about failures earlier. Failure is a resource. It helps you find the edge of your capacities. For those of you who haven't had failure, any failures, which I can't imagine anybody not having any failures, but if you haven't, it'll be tough. I mean, it's going to be really hard to make the first mistake. Now, if you've made as many mistakes as I have, I mean, it's not that I look for failure, but I'm not afraid of making a mistake. I'm just not. And when human resources are involved, I'm very conscientious. But still, at the end of the day, I can only give it my best shot. And one of the things we're going to talk about is I never second-guess myself, because I made some bad decisions in my business career, but I never beat myself. I've seen good men and women's career end because they beat themselves to death because of one bad business decision. I mean, and it's, I've seen careers ended. I mean, that were on a path like that because they made one bad business decision. They were afraid ever to make another one. I talk about failure not in a way that I don't want to leave the impression that failure's all right. No, I don't want to leave that impression. Failure's not all right. It's okay to get to success. Because a life of failure isn't what I'm trying to preach here. A life of success. And now, along that line, or along these lines, and I borrowed this from Napoleon Hill. I just found this here recently, and I've added it to the seminar because I didn't really look at it this way, but the more I think of it, the more I like it, and the more I agree. And it's that magic of a money consciousness. And when I start into this, I'm not saying that you do this in spite of everything, in spite of ruining careers, in spite of hurting people. That's not what I mean at all. Because I have a great deal of integrity, and a great deal of my reputation is really pretty much unblemished in business. But spasmodic or occasional effort will be of no value. You must apply until application becomes a fixed habit with you. Replication over and over and over, just like in athletics. Poverty is attracted to the one whose mind is favorable to it, as money is attracted to him whose mind has been deliberately prepared to attract it. Poverty consciousness will voluntarily seize the mind which is not occupied with money consciousness. Boy, that's true. A poverty consciousness develops without conscious application of habits favorable to it. The money consciousness must be created to order. That's what this seminar and seminars like this, and there are no seminars like this, but this is what, in my judgment, because this is not a spiritual, this is not what I consider a motivational, a personal development. This is a seminar about making your business, your life, your job, being more successful and being all that you can be. Because I would submit to you that most people in business and in life aren't anywhere near what they can be. And it's about developing what Napoleon Hill called 40, 50 years ago, a magic of money consciousness. And where it says poverty consciousness will voluntarily seize the mind which is not occupied with money consciousness, my way of saying that is that bad things will happen if you're not concentrating on good things. But the key is concentration and the key is focus. And if you lose focus, and like I've said earlier, if Casey stays after it, he'll continue to be successful. If Casey loses focus and doesn't stay after it, all that, and by the way, losing focus is geometric as well. You have to plan and think and grow and visualize geometric growth in a positive sense, but it comes upon you like AIDS in a negative sense. Because when the cycle turns the other way and you lose focus, you don't lose arithmetically. You lose geometrically. When things go wrong, they really go wrong. I mean, you get into the ass end of a cycle, I mean, with a tidy bowl, man, you're spinning around and then, it's ugly. I mean, because I've been in those cycles as well. Okay. Auntie? Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask this question. I used to ask a lot of these questions, but I know the answers. So, under no circumstance do I ever second guess myself. Never. And whether I'm right or wrong, I will go back and look at what made something happen that was correct, and I will go back and see what I did that was wrong that allowed it to get away. But in both cases, I never second-guess the decision and beat myself to death when I don't make a right decision. And men and women continue to do that to themselves. Men and women, I could have done this. The example I love to use is for those of you that are familiar with the San Fernando Valley. My father had the opportunity in 1953 or 4 to buy the corner of Topanga Canyon and Ventura Boulevard. Now, the last time that corner sold, it sold for $12 million. Now, he could have bought it for $3,000. Now, I remember driving out there as a little kid, and my dad said, God, the city's never going to get out here. But even I thought it could get out here. Dad, I mean, it's only 15 miles. Okay. He didn't buy it. Some guy bought it, and when he sold, the first guy sold it for $540,000. The second guy that sold it for $3 million. The third guy that sold it for $8 million, and the last guy that sold it for $12 million. Okay. Now it doesn't have a gas. It didn't have anything at that time. It had a gas station across the corner. At first, it had a Chevron station. Then it had a car wash. Now it's got a big, 30-story building on it. Now, forevermore, my father remembers that. Forevermore. Now, to say that the only time he was glad he didn't make that deal is when he divorced my mother. Because she would have got half of it. That's the only time in his life that he was happy he didn't have that. But I mean, forevermore. I mean, he has second-guessed that thing. So now he bought another piece of property, which, I mean, he will not be able to live long enough to realize a fraction of what that other piece of property. But see, he will continue to second-guess himself. And of course, while my parents were married, my mother continued to second-guess and helped him right along. And but see, that's an example that, one, he can't change it, so why waste time thinking about it? 2, it's affected his whole life the way he thinks about investments. His whole life. I mean, and there are people in this room, and if there aren't people in this room, there are people that you know that example that I just gave about my father, is true. And I know people, and some people that I know in this room, we know jointly people that, I mean, have continued to second-guess themselves. Now, contrary to what I've said all this morning, you won't always have the answers. And I urge you to take seriously the advice of people you respect. Now, that respect should be underlined, and it also should say in parentheses, people that have been successful at the thing that you're asking them about. You don't go to a guy who's been married 7 times for marital advice. And I have a good friend of mine, and when he sees this tape, I'm not going to mention his name, is a 7-time loser. I've got another friend of mine who's a 5-time loser. Now, now I'm happily married, but I mean, if I had a marital problem, I would not go to one of these 2 guys. Yet I see every week in business people asking people advice about something they have no idea. On the other hand, I also see people that will ask me advice. I'll give it to them, and because it wasn't what they wanted to hear, I was at a CEO club in Los Angeles. I think you were there, and I think you were there, Al. And I mentioned there are people in this room that have businesses that are mature that they ought to close them down. You talking about, there was 2 or 3 guys there that looked at me. Where did this psycho come from? What are we asking him to talk to us for? But it was obvious. Sometimes businesses become mature. The steel business became mature, and now they've revamped the whole thing. But the way the steel business was, matured. And there are businesses that mature, but you don't always have all the answers. And the people that you ask the answers, make sure they've been successful at the field that they're in. And we all hire, well, I don't anymore, but we hired consultants. They used to send in consultants, Arthur Anderson, Coopers and Lybrand, Morgan Guarantee. And, by the time I was 35, I'd been more successful than the guys that I'm paying a lot of money for advice. And I would want to see gray-haired guys coming in that had been there. I even like consultants that had been in real business for real and then had either sold their business or retired and were coming back. I like that even better because I wanted somebody that had been in the eye of the tiger. I had wanted somebody that had been knocked down. It's not how many times you're knocked down, it's how many times you get up off your back. And the consultant business now, especially in the United Kingdom, they come in with guys that look younger than Auntie, and they're sitting down there, and they were merchant bankers, and John Allen knows, he was there, and they're giving us high-priced advice, and I normally faded. I did the exact opposite, almost always, of the advice that I was given vis-a-vis the consultants that advised me when I was growing Great Western when we made acquisitions. Almost always. In fact, it became a joke. One of our lead lawyers from the UK, he was wrong every time. He gave good legal advice, but his commercial advice was just nothing. It was just abysmal. And it was a joke when Alan would come in. Well, what do you think of this deal? He says, it'll never go. It's a go, guys. It's a go. Alan has blessed it. He put the blessing on it. And then after 7 years, and he's a very bright corporate lawyer, still is, and after 7 or 8 years, we used to ask him, he says, no, I don't have any opinion anymore. And we say, come on, Alan, tell us. He says, nah, well, you're right. And he used to call me Mr. Chairman, you're right, I don't like the deal. It's a go, guys. It's a go. Okay, don't worry about it. Now, when I talk about drawing on experience, but I've also... Yes, sir.
In your experience, have you found the worst advice you can get comes from bankers, accountants, and lawyers? And that's who most business people go to for advice.
Yes, for commercial, bankers and lawyers are pretty close for commercial advice. And they just are. And but those are the guys that give advice. That's why I like to use, whenever I like to use people that have been out there and run companies. I was a graduate assistant in the School of Business, and the dean of our School of Business was a guy named Bill Raby, Dr. Bill Raby, Stanford PhD. We used to call him Rabbit Raby. I was his graduate assistant. And he had been executive vice president of United States Steel. He had been out there, And when he would taught these management courses we all took, I reveled in every word because he had really been there. And there's the famous story that the next dean was a guy named Howard Shenson. And he was a young man. He was only 2 years older than I was. He was acting dean, I guess. And I was teaching one of his classes one day, a lab. And I was sitting up there, and he came into the classroom. He didn't like the way I was teaching. He dismissed the lab, which pissed me off big time. And he says, "Follow me, Pena, into my office." And so we trot off. And I was visualizing I was going to crush his head when I didn't have witnesses. So we get in there, and he starts reading me the riot act about how I was teaching his lab. And I said, "You know, Howard, Raby's gone now, and you're not a pimple on his you-know-what, but you've never been out there." To make a long story short, he quit that June. He went out, built a very successful consulting business, sold it to the Wilson Company for $14 million, and traveled around with Zig Ziglar, Joe Mancuso, for years doing seminars and how to build a seminar business. But the reason he went out was I insulted him. I made him so mad because he knew what I was saying was the truth. He went out and became very successful. Unfortunately, Howard Shenson just passed away from cancer last year or year before that. I just found that out in the last few weeks. But, I mean, there was all the difference in the world from having people that have been there, done it, as opposed to theorize. And the thing about this seminar is this isn't theory. You may not like everything I say. You probably won't. But I can tell you, I did it and it works. And it's not, this isn't a theoretical exercise. You know, the quantum leap isn't a game like Monopoly. Quantum leap is real life things that have happened to me, not all of them good, but most of them good. And so how you perceive the deal will normally be how it happens. Casey perceived success in his deal buying this a jewelry company from 1867. And I told him from a marketing point of view, I don't know anything about jewelry. If you've been in business since 1867, if you can't make money with a company that says since 1867, you ought to blow your brains out. In fact, I was thinking how I could somehow link into that. Yeah, absolutely, John. What a track record. I said, you better get that company. I mean, we're going to do some things with that. Since 1867. I like that. I mean, you can't make money with that. Something's wrong. But perception is reality. The perception of that is stability, etc., etc., etc. I mean, you know, Quantum Leap seminars since 1992. I mean, you know, so the Quantum Leap seminars since 1867, or an affiliation of, or I mean, we'll figure out some words. But so perception is reality, and the perception allows you to acquire more perception. I bought Guthrie Castle, and we're going to talk about goal setting. One, because I wanted to, that was my exit, but it didn't work out to be my exit because Charlie Soliday passed away. But the perception to the UK investors, I lived in Great Britain. My daughter was born in Scotland. She carries a British passport. At one time, 35% of the company was owned by Scottish institutions. I could come down for a cup of coffee, drive down to Edinburgh and Glasgow. I could fly down, I could be in London in 3 hours. I knew if we were going to go public in the United Kingdom, I was going to be there a lot because we were going to raise a lot of money. And it's a lot easier, oh, that's not a lot easier. It's impossible to raise a lot of money unless you're there, pushing the deal through. Right, John Allen? Okay. So I did that, and I became, it was like I was part of the family. It was a natural progression when I went from Brown Shipley to S.G. Warburg, which is the creme de la creme. But I was there, Dan, you know, Laird of Guthrie Castle. They don't call him Lord in Scotland, Laird of Guthrie Castle. But it was part of the perception. It's part of the length I went through to make Great Western what it was. And I'm not saying it was any great sacrifice living up there in a big castle, although I paid for it, contrary to what some of the shareholders used to ask me. I mean, it was part of the perception. And just think through, if you're a lawyer, if you're a psychiatrist, if you're in real estate or construction, just think of the perception of the people that you want to do business with. What's their perception of you? Is the perception of you of some of the things I've outlined, or is the perception of you their perception of you? And remember, whether it's true or not, perception is reality. I tell my kids, if you dress this way, I mean, you are whatever the people think you are, whether you are or not. When we're talking about earrings, green hair, and stuff like that, which they don't have. In fact, we gave them a Marine haircut recently, like boot camp. And, you know, just to prove a point, Linda thought maybe it was too ugly of a point, but to prove a point, that they wouldn't die if they didn't have longer hair. You will not die with short hair. You think you're going to die, but you're not going to die. And we're going to show you you're not going to die. So, yeah, they thought they were going to die, though. Every time that thing went through, then they kind of liked it, you know. It was easier. And
all three of them, or just?
No, not my daughter. Not my, yeah. No, it wasn't my daughter. My daughter didn't do that, but I got another thing with my daughter. I like hair that's brushed, you know, and my daughter looks like sometimes in the morning she wakes up and she looks like she's had a hard night, and she's a little too young to have had a hard night. You know what I mean? But she looks up and her hair's all frazzled, and she walks around, goes down for breakfast, and I say, "Go brush your hair." Well, why? And that's not a real good question to ask me when you're my 6-year-old daughter. She's not going to be 7. But I tell her, you know, when people come over, I mean, you're going to be 20 years old and you're going to look like that. And so I make her brush her hair. And of course my son's like that, because that means I'm disciplining their sister, who they think gets away with murder, which is fairly accurate. But, okay, Auntie. Now, this is important, and this is, the things I did right were guided by. And we're going to cover a few more things, and then we're going to break for lunch. Now, this is me. And then we're going to ask you about you. So think about this. The things I did right were guided by mostly intuition and instinct. I'm here to say that 95 to 98% of the time you think of something, the first thing you think of is right. And it's even higher with women. I didn't used to like saying that, but now I'm, you know. Yeah, that's exactly right, Becky. I'm getting comfortable. But it's probably 98 to 99 with women. Okay. Second thing is seminars. I was guided. And I talked about 2 of the seminars I went to. Jim Newman, PACE, and I went to PACE 2. And he helped me redefine my definition for success. And for that I will always be beholding. And that's another great book to read. I forgot. It's called Release Your Brakes by Jim Newman. And his theory was, and he invented the comfort zone. And if any of you have ever driven with the emergency brake on, forgot to take it off, you know what it feels like. Well, he contends, because people don't feel comfortable, you go through life with your emergency brake on. You set goals like you have your emergency brake on. That was 2 seminars. And the third seminar I went to was a Dennis Waitley seminar. And it was, I think, one of the first ones he did, Psychology of Winning. And he really got me interested in seminars. And then I went to the 2 Newmans. So, I mean, those were the 3 seminars. I've been to gazillions of them since. But, I mean, those were the 3 that really changed my way of thinking. Actually, the 2 Newmans PACE. Third were mentors. And we're going to talk about mentors and how to pick them and how to get their interest. And fourth was hard knocks, mistakes. I made a lot of these. I quadrupled my failure rate. I didn't just double it. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes. And last but not least were my successes. Because I just continued to do what I did well. And I did more of it and more of it and more of it. And, you know, this will be different for everybody in this room. I would venture to guess, though, this will be high on everybody's list. And this will be on your list. This may or may not be on your list. This may or may not be on your list. And that should be on everybody's list because everybody's had some degree of success. And no matter how small you think those successes are, blow them up. Revel in them. I mean, make them bigger than they are. I mean, talk about them. And it sounds like I'm saying brag about them, but I mean, talk success. When a successful ball team, or like in baseball, is on a winning streak, okay, that's all they talk about, boy. That's all they talk about. When a golfer's in the zone, I mean, and he's hitting them stiff to the pin, I mean, that's all they talk about. When a guy's playing real super tennis, I mean, he talks about it. I mean, and what I'm saying is, when you have a success, beat it to death. Now, we've been taught, well, that's braggadocious. That's not professional. I'm here to say that's crap. Beat it to death. I mean, like my wife will tell you, when Dan does something right, he rides it till its legs fall off. And that's true. In fact, I ride it past the legs. You know, when I did that deal in London, that $60,000 option and made it $50 million, I'm still beating it. And it changed the way they did business in London. There was a whole slew. Isn't that right, John Allen? I mean, it changed the way they did business in London. I mean, and I still get credit as being the most flamboyant, litigious man to set foot in London in the 80s. The real J.R. Ewing. Entrepreneur of classic American design. Dominic Lawson, the Financial Times. Pardon? Yeah, larger than life. I mean, yeah. I mean, on and on and on. And I'm still beating it. But, you know, maybe I'm just a one-trick guy, you know, like poor Jobs. But if you've only got a one trick, I mean, beat it to death. I mean, if you've only won one tournament or you've only had one success, talk about it, because that kind of talk is infectious, because people want to deal with successful people. How many of you would rather deal with a successful person in whatever area that you're talking about, or somebody that hasn't been? When you go to a heart surgeon, don't you, is DeBakey still alive? The old man? Okay, well, I go, his doctors are part of my group, or I'm part of their group, excuse me. And so, but when I was introduced to the group, and he comes and he interviews all the patients personally, and he's got his green thing. I don't know when the last time he ever did surgery. He's got his green thing up there, his hat, and he's Mr. Pena, Dr. Atar, who's my doctor, says this and that, and so and I said, why are we going through this little regimen? He says, because all these young doctors are around, because he's trying to set a model, Dan, of success. This is how successful people do practice medicine. So I had to go through, I had to drive down there to Methodist, and when you go into Methodist, you're like going into a big hotel. I mean, you got a statue of him, you got a, like God, and then they've got these little guys with blue blazers running around, and you want a coffee, and they'll be serving drinks pretty soon there. But I mean, this is an edifice to him, and nobody revels in success like he does. Boy, he pats himself on the back like like nobody. But that's good, because the people that he's training will naturally accept success that much more readily. And from tennis to golf, when you have instructors, that's why when my wife took up golf for a short period of time, Donna Capone's father at that time in the 70s was the finest golf coach for women in the world. Linda, I wanted her, if she was going to learn how to play golf, I wanted the best in the world. And so she started with him. And he just, my daughter won the ladies PGA 3 times, and the this and the that. And so it's important. It's very important to revel in your successes. Now, I'm going to talk a little later about my mentors. One was Newman, I already mentioned, and there's two more, a Mr. Grazos and a Mr. Jerry Ormond, who's from Texas. But I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Auntie? Now, this is the different side of that question. The many mistakes I didn't make were avoided because. And I avoided a lot of them, not all of them. Again, intuition and instinct. Again, the seminars. Again, the mentors. And in this case, Mastermind Group, which I've been a part of. Tapes and books. Successes. Because every success, or every failure, I should say, that's possible in business, you don't have to learn yourself. This is a concept that should not be a revelation to you. You needn't make every stinking mistake from ground zero to ground 100, or from floor 1 to 50 floors up. We think we do, but we don't. And that's why tapes and books do work. Not all of them. Most of them aren't worth much. Mastermind groups do work. Mentors do work. Seminars, the right ones, do work. And your intuition and your instincts play a huge part. Now, I personally am not a big believer in mastermind groups because they haven't worked for me. I know they've worked for many, many, many people. So, but if you're going to have a mastermind group, and that is, let's say 8 of us to get together, we're in different industries, but we want to play off one another's energy, brain power, etc. My judgment, they should be in different areas of expertise, not the same. And that goes against conventional wisdom. They should be different, not the same. Lawyer, accountant, priest, oil man, contractor. But they should all be similar level of experience. They're either all superstars or none. And the reason mastermind groups haven't worked for me is I wound up getting all my brains sucked out, and I didn't suck anybody else's brains. And so I decided the mentor, I would rather be somebody's mentor than be part of a mastermind group. But it's very important, in my judgment, they have to either all be superstars or none of them. You have to be on the same level of experience vis-a-vis your particular area. You have to have them geographically desirable. I know people that are trying to do mastermind groups, a guy in Philadelphia, a guy in Biloxi, Mississippi, and a guy in San Francisco. That's baloney. That doesn't work. You've got to be there. You've got to have the same time commitment. Is everybody willing to spend 3 hours a week, 3 hours a month, whatever? But they have to be similar because animosity forms. If Marcia's in my group and she says I can spend 2 hours a month and Dan can only spend 2 hours a quarter, I mean, that doesn't work. No chairperson. And this is, again, flies in the face of conventional wisdom because most people say there should be a chairperson. Nobody is superior to anybody else. That doesn't mean the specific agenda that you want to accomplish, and you should always have an agenda. You should have an agenda and a portion for free thinking, free talking. That doesn't mean one person can't make sure you get through the agenda, but that doesn't mean he's got any more to say as part of the mastermind group than you do. Okay? They have to all have exhibited successful traits more than your contemporaries. By definition, if you're all superstars, that's easy to define. But if you're not all superstars, and you're starting off in life, let's say second year out of school, or you're a fifth-year lawyer, but you have to want, and it's absolutely mandatory, that all the people within the group have exhibited successful traits more than your contemporaries. Otherwise, why have a mastermind group? And number 7, and this is where they kills everyone, don't be embarrassed to leave if growth process stops. Because it always will. You got to know when to suck up your pantyhose and leave and go to the next mastermind group. This is where I've seen most of them fail here because they become social. We become friends. Our wives go shopping. We play golf together. Are all those reasons to be in a mastermind group? No. But that's what happens. That's what happens. Now the mentor is obviously got to be significantly more successful than you by definition. He's got to be a senior person you really like and respect. Vastly more experience, but accessibility desired, where you can go drop by and see him, you can call him. If you can't have that, then you don't want him. Same field of endeavor, most desirable. The opposite of this. Same field of endeavor, most desirable, not mandatory. Now, I'm going to talk about my 3 mentors in a second. And something else in common outside business. Because you're going to be spending a lot of time with him or her, you got to have something in common. You either got to be able to play golf. It's a lot easier for Bob to be my mentor if Bob, and I want to spend a lot of time with him, if we play golf, we play tennis, we fish. If we got nothing else in common other than I want to suck his brains, that isn't going to work in my judgment. It hasn't for me. Now, I've had the pleasure of having 3. I've already talked about Jim Newman. I'm going to spend just a few minutes on the other 2. There's a gentleman here in Texas named Jerry Orman, the founder, former chairman of Orman Industries. It was a conglomerate, American Stock Exchange company. He's still alive. Jerry's 75 years old, lives in Bel Air, California now. He was my mentor in the oil business. He and I are still best friends. I've helped his sons. And he gave me invaluable help when I was getting in the oil business. I couldn't have done it with a lot of his sage advice. And he's like my second father. My other mentor was a gentleman named Konstantin Gratsos, who was the CEO of a NASA shipping line. I met him in the late 70s. We did an oil deal together. He liked me. He was 80 at the time. And whenever I got the chance, I spent time in New York City. He was the head of the Christine Onassis Trust. He was the right-hand man for Ari Onassis till he died. He had invaluable input into my career. I mean, he told me things that I could have never learned without making tremendous mistakes. And he talks about diversification. He says, Dan, never call me Dan, that's not wrong. Mr. Pena. He never called me by my first name, always Mr. Pena. Very European, very bright. And he says, he used to tell me when I come up with ideas, I tried that in 36, it didn't work. Tried that in 45, it didn't work. Ari tried that in 1916, it didn't work. But see, when he told me it didn't work, that was it. No, I didn't even try it. I don't know if it worked or not. But if you're going to a guy that runs one of the biggest organizations in the world, Onassis Shipping Lines, I mean, why was I, at 31 years old, going to decide, after they spent $25 million doing it, whether it worked or not? But he told me this. He said, we're talking about diversification. He says, Mr. Pena, we own this building, Olympic Towers. It's 40% empty. We don't know how to manage it. We'd like to get rid of it. But we decided to diversify into real estate. We used to own Greek Airlines. We gave it back to the government. We have 107 ships that are all paid for, cash, from a Bahamian port. We know that, and we have cash in the bank. What we know a lot about is shipping. We know a little bit about managing cash, and we know nothing about this building. That's the extent of our expertise. We don't do anything else. Period. Full stop, as they say in the UK, which means period. We'd like to have 25 more ships. That was his advice. But no, when he died, I went in the movie business anyway. He's probably rolling in his grave. He also